right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Podcast in Progress. And today I'm here with my old friend, Isaac Morehouse. Isaac is the CMO of Reveal and Partner Hacker. We're going to be talking about the podcasting partnership ecosystem, which is a term that's been kicking around in my head for a long time. And it's been sort of ill-defined as I've kind of been groping my way towards an understanding of what this medium is. It's been around now for at least 10 years, maybe 15 years. But nowadays, it seems like everybody and their mother has a podcast. It's not just for big media companies and personalities. And there's this sense in which, you could say that the market for podcasts is saturated or even oversaturated. And yet I think that it really speaks to a new world that we're entering into where really everyone can be a podcaster, and there's no sense of anyone needing to filter or limit themselves and what we're able to do. And in some sense, it's just another extension of the media environment in the same way that anyone could have a Twitter account. And the reason that I thought Isaac would be a good person to talk to about this is because what I see a lot of people using podcasts for these days is essentially a kind of relationship building. The term networking gets overused and it has this sort of slimy feel to it, but there is this component of, you sit down with someone and it's one of these last few places where we can actually have, not always in person, but it's still like a form of connection that I think is really called for, as long as we're not spending all day on Zoom. So anyway, with that, Isaac, thanks for being here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, man. I love the name and the theme, by the way, Podcast in Progress. I very much, when I started my first podcast, it's probably 2013. That was really sort of the way that I saw the theme, and the point of the show was just, I want to learn out loud. And like, this is primarily for me. And that's kind of, as you were talking, that was the first thing that popped into my mind. Is a good friend of mine, TK Coleman, likes to always tell people, you're not being selfish enough. And what he means by that is, when it comes to, let's say, launching a podcast or blogging every day or any kind of these disciplines that people tend to think of as like building their brand or something. It's like, no, you're thinking too much about other people. You're thinking too much about what it's going to do for other people and what your audience is going to think and what people are going to think. Don't treat it that way. Treat it selfishly. I always use the quote, and I use this started with writing, started with daily blogging before I podcasted, but I always think about C.S. Lewis as this great quote where he had a friend, like an atheist friend, telling him, C.S. Lewis was praying for his sick wife. Like, you really think praying for your wife is going to change? Like, if God created everything, like, you praying is going to change his mind. And C.S. Lewis said, I don't pray because it changes God. I pray because it changes me. And I always have used that. I don't write because it changes the world. I don't podcast because it's going to change my audience lives. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But I do it because it changes me. And when you have that approach, like, what's the value to me of having these conversations? Suddenly the world opens up. So if you see podcasts as another form of entertainment or advertising or brand building, then you're certainly going to come to conclusions like, too many people have podcasts. The world doesn't need another podcast. Why would I compete with everyone else doing a podcast? But if you say, no, this is actually something different. Podcast is a different thing here. We have the chance to, now sometimes it serves that purpose. We have the chance to think about it as a different category. A podcast is an opportunity to talk with people who would never talk with you if you just emailed them and said, can I have an hour of your time? They never would. But if you say, can I bring you on my podcast? Even if you have no audience, I have a friend, this is a great way to illustrate this. He used to give this little presentation called like, a podcast is better than a degree from Harvard. And what he meant was not even the things you can learn, but the networking, the connection. He's like, I spent a year podcasting and just going and finding all of the people who were interested in all the things that I was interested in. And for him, it was like philosophical stuff. And so he would go in like way deep, like nerdy scholars of mathematics and physics and all these different things. And he would hit them up. And sometimes he would travel to where they lived at whatever, Oxford or something, and be like, can I interview you on my podcast? These people never get asked that, right? And they don't ask, how many audience members do you have? And he would have these amazing conversations. and build all these connections. So now he's got, one-on-one ability to email or text or call all kinds of people all over the world. And this works in business, that works in any field. I mean, if you're really interested in a particular niche, especially, if you're just like really passionate about, whatever, marine biology, you can have conversations with the best marine biology people in the world if you just have a podcast and call it a podcast and message them and say, I want to bring you on my podcast to ask you about your most recent book. Right? But you can't just say, hey, can I get lunch with you? We've never met. That's pretty rare that people will say yes to that. So it's just this amazing ability to open your own world up and bring you into conversations that are really cool and really interesting. You and I haven't reconnected in forever. We're both really busy with families and work. We probably wouldn't just jump on a phone call for no reason just to catch up. But podcast, let's go. Let's have a conversation. Like there's something about the medium that just opens things up that you wouldn't otherwise get.
And the thing about the selfish reasons, yeah, I mean, going through the motions of producing my own podcast, for one, it helps me sharpen my toolkit because I'm working with my clients are primarily podcasters. That aspect of who would talk to you if you just called them up and said, hey, can I have an hour of your time? That's almost verbatim what my first client, who was a radio host, said was his motivation for starting his radio show. Was there were all these people, it was, academic types and public intellectuals who would have just looked at him funny if he'd emailed them or called them up on the phone. But as soon as he said radio show, but you make a good point that you don't even need a radio show these days. People are just willing to come on and talk for the most part. And even though the absolute number of people with a podcast might be staggeringly high, as a percentage of the population, it's still pretty small. And what percentage of people has actually ever been asked to be on a podcast? Yesterday, I did a podcast with a guy who has a small but growing following, and it was fun. It was the flow. It was a connection with this guy who had a lot of sort of similar values, and without his podcast, we never would have had that chance to connect. Another aspect that I think is underrated with respect to podcasting is this kind of like your reason for writing. It's a brain dump, and it's a way to get your ideas down without having that filter pop in. When you're speaking extemporaneously, sometimes the stuff that comes out of your mouth is like, yeah, we'll edit that later. But sometimes you actually say something that, just like in the writing process, you have to actually start typing for anything to come out. And that kind of ties in with what I primarily do with my podcasting clients, which is try to repurpose their ideas. But selfishly, coming back to my selfish motivation, you use some terminology. Your industry is sort of this B2B SaaS, software as a service. Software is eating the world. It's this huge thing. Just as everybody and their mother has a podcast, everybody has a platform, or everybody has some sort of software that might solve a problem. But how do we determine what we're going to buy, what we're going to align with? I think you guys are asking some of the more interesting philosophical questions around how people come to trust and ultimately buy or give their attention to one thing over another. So first of all, you use this term a lot that I'd never encountered because I don't really have much of a sales background, but the term nearbound. And I think this is kind of a play on like inbound versus outbound, something to do with leads maybe. But can you just explain like what the heck is nearbound and why should people care?
Yeah. And this is really fun too, because I spent, pretty much the last decade as an entrepreneur. I built a couple different companies that were in the consumer space, that were working with early job seekers, helping them, get placed in startups, and built a boot camp doing that. And then built a software platform to do that. And so I was not in the B2B. It just means business to business, right? Selling software tools to other businesses to use in their business processes. I was not in that world. I mean, I knew a bit about it, and I was helping people get jobs there and things. So my co-founder convinced me to help him found Partner Hacker just a year ago, which is a media company. And it's very, very niche. If you know the world that I'm talking about, you'll immediately know what I'm talking about. If you don't, you'll be like, I don't really know. I'm not sure what Isaac means. But people that work in software companies, B2B software companies that are selling software to other businesses, there's sales, there's marketing, and then there's partnerships, which is often a department where it's anything from people managing what other products you integrate with. So let's say you're, Webflow, and you want to set up an integration with MailChimp, right? So it's like a website building platform and an email platform. That's one type of partnership. There are partnerships with like marketing agencies. If you're selling a product like Salesforce, which a lot of people use to manage their database of clients and potential clients, maybe you're a marketing agency and businesses hire you to come in and set up all of their different software that they'll use to run their business. And you might sell Salesforce, even though you don't work for Salesforce, through your agency, and you might get some sort of commissions. You might be a part of their partner program, right? That's another type of partnerships. So there's all these different ways that businesses partner with others to indirectly sell their product. And that's kind of been treated as sort of this like off to the side thing. It's like, marketing goes out and creates demand and does content and things to drive people to the website and capture leads. And then sales takes those leads and tries to sell them, goes and cold emails people or tries to book demos. And then partnerships is like, yeah, we have like a partnerships department over here and they're trying to figure out ways to get distribution through other channels. And that's kind of how it's been treated. And the idea with Partner Hacker, our motto is trust is the new data. That we've moved into a bit of a different world in the last couple of years in the digital world. It's like a new phase of the digital world where you have to start thinking differently. You have to start thinking about your buyers as being primarily influenced by people, not by information. And I call it the who economy. We've moved from the how economy to the who economy. So in the how economy, the primary way, if you're a business selling software, maybe you're selling some kind of accounting software that makes bookkeeping easier for other businesses. The primary way you were going to sell was when people asked the question, how, if you were the number one result. How do I improve my bookkeeping? How do I track expenses easier? Is there a better way? Is there something that works better than a spreadsheet to do this? If your stuff came up first on Google, if you had the best product review on G2, right? If they were finding you or you were finding them, they get an email all of a sudden from someone that says, hey, we can help you increase your efficiency by, automating your bookkeeping processes. They were answering a how question. Now I call it the infocalypse. There's so much information. It's overwhelming. People are now, they know everything's gamed. Every review is 4.7 stars. So it's really good, but not perfect. So it looks real. And, like the Google, the SEO gamification is so high when you go look for something, you don't really know if you can trust the results you're getting. There's like content marketing coming at you, cold emails. People are tuning out. The average American sees as much as 10,000 ad impressions per day. Like between, now it's a huge range. It's between 500 and 10,000. A lot of it depends on what you're doing and where you work. But so you're just tuning out, right? So our thesis is people are now changing to ask the question, who? When they have a problem, they're like, who can I ask about solving this problem? Who has had this problem before that's already solved it? Who do I trust that I can go to? And it's almost like reverting to a smaller networks and nodes of trust. And you'll notice some of these trends. Google, the highest growing area of Google search is when people search Reddit using Google. So they're using Google to search subreddits. Why? Because when they're asking what kind of tires should I buy, they want to know what people in Reddit communities are saying about that. Because they want to know what real people are saying, not what companies are telling them. When people are looking for, just in your own life, you're looking for some big purchase you're going to make. You want to go find someone who's done it before, and you want to ask them. And so that's the idea of tapping into thinking of partnerships as something that's not like a department in your company, but it's a strategy that every department should be thinking through, should be using. So your marketing teams should be finding out who your buyers already trust, what companies they already trust, maybe they're already customers of them, what individuals they already trust, and partnering with them, doing co-marketing with them. Let's host a webinar with, if you're a customer of MailChimp, let's host a webinar with MailChimp and we'll talk about how our products work together, right? Or let's go, if you're a sales team, let's go tap into the information that our partners have. If we have someone that we're trying to sell to and they're already a customer of one of these companies that we partner with, let's go ask their sales team, what do you know about it? How can you help me navigate that process? Maybe we can sell together. Can you help me influence this deal? And it's just recognizing something that's very, very old, but we kind of forgot in the advent of the digital age, that it comes down to people and relationships. And that's where trust is the strongest. And we had this like early digital era where it was like, hey, we don't need that anymore. because I can just Google it, right? I can just trust the computer to tell me all the information I need. I don't need to go ask people. I don't need like, the old idea of like you have to have a guy for everything. You didn't need that for a while, but now you do again because there's just too much information. So that's kind of the general setup. And Partner Hacker, this media company, basically just talking about ways to utilize this strategy. We recently merged with a company called Reveal, which is a company that provides software that helps people do this. The idea of nearbound was a term created by over at Reveal to basically try to define what does this mean to bring this strategy of tapping into people your buyers already trust. What does it mean to bring that into the buying process and into the selling process? And how can you do that in a systematic way? So you have outbound, which is your company is they're targeting people that they think are likely to be customers, and they're reaching out to them with emails, all kinds of things, trying to get a hold of them, trying to talk to them. You have inbound, which is your company creating a lot of content that tries to sort of evangelize the problem and help people land on your blog or your site and say, oh, you've created a guide on how to solve this. Great, I'll download it. And you collect their email address, and then you can send them emails and market to them about your solution. And both of those are getting harder and harder. And nearbound is the idea of it's not a replacement for those, but it's surrounding all of those with nodes of trust, with not just here's a guide for you, but hey, we're gonna do a podcast episode with somebody that your buyers already trust, right? You figure out who are those people? Who are the people that influence them, the individuals, the companies? Let's work with them and let's bring them into the marketing and sales process so that our buyers are looking for who has been to the place I want to go that I trust. Oh, great. This person keeps talking about this product. I guess I'll check it out, right? So it involves everything from like influencer marketing to doing more with tech integrations. But it's really just a recognition that buyers are asking who instead of how, and figuring out how to scale that up into a company that has these very efficient sales and marketing processes that are very driven by like automated tasks. How do you do that still has the ability to scale, but it also is personal and it is connected to people that your buyers trust?
And comparing it to inbound and outbound, and the idea of Partner Hacker being the end run around both of these extremely saturated strategies with something that is just much more direct, it's more personal. And I'll give an example, something that a decision I had to make recently of I'm switching over actually the website that I use for hosting, because there's a competitor that does something very similar, but they have a Medium integration and I don't have to set up a separate blog. I'm already
Yes.
posting on Medium, and this allows me to embed my Medium within the website. So immediately I know that this company is kind of ahead of the curve, or at least, it's just a better fit for me. Maybe
Yep.
the one that I'm currently on is a better fit for someone else, but the whole
They're tapping into the ecosystem that you're already a part of
right.
and that you already have trust with, versus trying to, get you to just come to them isolated on an island, and just recognizing like, hey, where do my buyers live? They probably, a lot of them like Medium. We should maybe have an
Right.
integration with Medium. Maybe we should do some co-marketing with Medium. Just that's how buyers are thinking. They want to work within those ecosystems.
It's beautiful. And originally we met in the context of kind of free market circles, and people ditch on the free market all the time for being this zero sum game, when in fact it's really like it's a positive sum thing, where if you find your specialty, you can partner with adjacent organizations to create that ecosystem. You're not trying to compete directly with somebody to steal their lunch. That's not how you win the game. You win
Yep.
the game by providing the most value and figuring out these kind of connections. So getting into that sort of ecosystem, there's like the big picture technology software ecosystem where there's different integrations. Another example from podcasting, I use what we're using Zoom today because we had a little glitch with Riverside on my end, but that's also part of this process for me. The podcast in progress is learning to iron out all the kinks in that process. But with Riverside, I chose that because they have an integration with Descript, the editing software. So it's another example. Software is kind of coming together and finding these ways to simplify people's workflows. And Descript becomes a source of referrals for Riverside, and Riverside becomes a source of referrals for Descript. But you can also, I think, apply the same framework to a podcasting ecosystem. And there are hundreds, thousands, maybe even, tens of thousands of little podcasting niches where you can kind of find like, oh, this guy's been on that podcast. And then uh, you can find these kind of commonalities and they all blend together in different ways. But when you have a podcasting ecosystem, I think it does tend to create influence in the genuine sense of it, not in the sense of, an Instagram influencer or something so superficial, but it's a way to create kind of not just trust and expertise, but I think there's a sense of community that
Yes.
can evolve, and you're sort of turning people on to new ideas, and that's been a huge engine of discovery in my own life, just with my personal interests, listening to podcasts, and then one person who's a guest on a show, I start to follow them on their primary platform. So it's not a zero sum game. It's something positive sum. You
Well,
guys,
and here's where, so we'll tie this all together. So here's
yeah,
where, if you're in the business world and you're selling some technology or software or whatever, this combining podcasting or just media sort of in general with kind of some of the things I talked about with sort of like a near bound strategy, here's the way that this can work in layers. So Partner Hacker actually started as a podcast. It was just a podcast called the Partner Up Podcast, and built a good following of people in this partnership space, right? Usually you create a community through content. So you put out content, a community kind of rallies around it. Now you have a community, you have trust with them. It becomes very easy to roll out other things. So then we launched a newsletter and a website. Then guess what comes next? Events. Everybody wants to be doing events if you have a community. Hey, we should all get together. We should do events. So we start rolling out events. And now we have this really influential community in the partnerships space. And one of the big software companies in that space is like, hey, our marketing is not that good. You guys have this media brand. We should join forces. Okay. So now we join forces. So now here's how this is a win in two different ways for this software company. And for any company, any business, you can think about a media strategy as this two-pronged value. One is kind of the more obvious one, that you build trust and influence with your audience. You're educating. It's kind of the traditional way of thinking about it. If you have a podcast or if you have a blog or if you have a newsletter or whatever it is, YouTube channel, more people are hearing about your product. It's awareness, right? It's problem awareness, solution awareness, brand awareness. You're increasing your reach. That's obvious. It's very true. And you build a lot of trust. It's very valuable. But here's the second way that a lot of people don't think about. It's a very, very targeted way to influence. If you're selling to businesses and let's say your software, that you're selling is worth 30 or 50 grand a year, that's how much you're selling it for, right? Some of these enterprise deals can be hundreds of thousands per year. So if you have an account that you're targeting, that you really want to break into and you're trying to sell to, and you don't really have a good in, you're having a hard time. What you can do if you have a newsletter or a podcast, you can find someone at that company, say it's the CMO, and you can hit them up and be like, hey, we want to bring you on our podcast. I think what you're doing over at your company is really cool. I'd love to talk about it. Now you're not asking them to go talk to one of your salespeople. Hey, can we try to talk to you about our solution? You're like, hey, I want to interview you on our podcast. And now you've created a relationship there and you have this good rapport. You've given them something for free, given them value, and you've built a good relationship because you gave them something. You've invested in them. Or if you're, writing, hey, we want to do an article about, I saw you guys launched a new integration. We'd love to write about it. If you have a media brand, you can do that kind of thing. Now you have a relationship. Now you can say, hey, by the way, we should chat about what you're doing to handle your whatever, accounting problem. Let's have you talk with one of our guys and see if there's something in there, right? Now, all of a sudden, maybe your sales team is working somebody totally different in the company and trying to get, a meeting or close a deal. But now they've got another person in the company who has good feelings about you, who has a good relationship. You're surrounding that account with influence just by using the platform that you have in a really strategic way. And of course, if you're disingenuous, if you're like, come on my podcast to everybody you're trying to sell and they're a horrible guest and you don't have anything to talk about, well, it's not going to work. Like it has to be complimentary, but it's really not that hard to make this a complimentary strategy. It's like, okay, this person probably won't give us a meeting to do a demo of our product, but I bet we can get them to come on our podcast and talk about what they're doing at their company. And it's just such a thing. It's just such a simple thing that people don't think about. So That way you just got to get to surround all of these accounts with your influence, if you have these kind of outlets.
Right. So when it comes to like structuring a partnership or you've got an idea, and maybe first we can just talk about this in the context of B2B SaaS, that sort of thing, because you've kind of got this down to a science. And I've read much of the Partner Hacker Handbook, which is something people can get if you sign up for the email list. It's really a very substantial and still readable, even though I'm not in this industry. Going through it, there's the sort of Partner Hacker Manifesto, trust is the new data. Anyone who's operating in any kind of media environment or trying to be media savvy will benefit from checking out this book. What are the lessons for how to structure a partnership and how to identify the right kinds of partners for your ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I am definitely not the world's foremost expert on this. I have definitely done it wrong and I've done it right. So when you're thinking about, partnerships in general, I think always start where it's almost already a partnership informally or where it just feels like an easy win. So if you keep finding yourself, you work with somebody, you do something together and you just love it. It's a lot of fun. They're easy to work with. That's a great sign, right? So like you can start very informally, you can start very simply, say, hey, hold on a second, like what we're doing, what you're doing. And you can even start by just giving people stuff for free. So like when it comes to, our company, we just announced a partnership, Rev Genius. It's a big community of, sales and marketing professionals. And that came about because we just kept finding we liked their LinkedIn posts and their content and they liked ours. And then we just started like complimenting them and sharing cool stuff about them for free. And just basically like doing co-marketing without permission, without asking them. Being like, hey, check out Rev Genius. They're awesome, blah, blah, blah. And then they're like, hey, you guys are really cool. Like we keep talking about each other and bumping into each other and like promoting each other. We should talk. Maybe there's something more here. And then we start talking and it's like, yeah, this is really cool. Now we have a formalized partnership where we're going to be launching a whole bunch of initiatives together. We're doing a bunch of co-marketing with those initiatives. We have kind of a whole process, but that came about really organically. Again, this is the way things work in the world today. And I used to do this with people getting jobs. This is how I tell job seekers, like go find companies you think are cool, follow them on Twitter, listen to if anybody at their company goes on a podcast, listen to the episode, write a summary about it and tweet it. Say, wow, I love the way that, Spotify's head of brand designed their new thing. I heard him on this podcast. It was amazing. You start doing that kind of stuff, people notice it, and all of a sudden you start getting conversations. Then you go to apply for a job there and say, hey, by the way, I was just tweeting at your head of brand about blah, blah, blah. It's the same way in the business world. You can just start by identifying people that you keep bumping into, you keep running into, and you're like, this would be cool. We could do some stuff together. Find ways that you can just do it without permission to start with, that you can just like show them love, right? In any way you can, like make them famous, as we like to say. And it can be as simple as just commenting on their stuff on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever. And then like, that's how you really get to that first stage. Because if you're like, oh, it would be amazing to partner with Stripe. They're a great company. They're huge. But you don't have there's no play. You have no relationship. You have nothing established. It's just like this big dream. That's probably a lot harder than if you've got like to start with, there's some kind of like obvious easy wins. And then you can start to think a lot more strategically. And if you do want to partner with Stripe, then start to think from like a broader standpoint, what would that look like? What would be a win for them? You always have to start every partnership asking, how will it benefit them? And how can I make sure it's a win for them? Instead of like, okay, I want this company to send me leads. How can I make that happen? Right? It's probably not going to work.
Right. It's kind of like in dating. You don't just walk up to someone at the bar and be like, hey, will you have my kids or something like that? It's that's a pretty big ask. You got to first sort of demonstrate that you're bringing something to the table. And also it has to be organic. You might
And interest in them, right? Interest in
right,
them. You don't go, here's
right.
10 reasons I'm highly dateable. You're like, hey, you are fascinating to me. I used to tell job seekers this. The first thing you should say is something about the company you're applying to, why
Yeah,
you love them. Talk about them before you talk about you. Because otherwise they're just like, you don't care. You just want to work for anybody, right?
right. There's a big trend in the world of kind of podcast growth hacking where it's all about guesting on other shows. So you've got your pitch to shows. You say, here's the things I want to that I could talk about, and in that sense, you're trying to deliver something of value to them. But sometimes that can come across as a little bit forward or self promotional. And I think one thing I'm getting out of this is that you can get a lot of the same benefits just reframing it slightly and getting back into hosting mode, just inviting them on, finding a way to make it a win for them. And that starts to build the organic relationship. So, guesting versus hosting might be a mixture of the two. And if you develop a relationship in the process of hosting someone, if they have a podcast, then that might turn into something else. But it doesn't have to be, an all at once marriage. You can take little baby steps on your
Yep.
path. Uh,
Yep.
and then kind of a final question here, because we had talked about micro podcasts as the format that I'm leaning towards, partly
Oh yeah.
because
Sorry.
I
I'm a very
no this
rambly
is
guy. I'm not very micro.
no, this is perfect. I mean, you're certainly making it a win for me, and there's a like what I'm planning to do with this conversation, just for full disclosure, is I'm gonna turn it into a little like explainer type article, and hopefully that'll be some kind of an asset for you, that it won't feel like I'm giving you a chore. I think this idea in the podcasting world, like, oh, I got to get on Joe Rogan. If I just get on Joe Rogan, then everything will come online for me. The idea of like finding a niche and thriving within that niche is something we find both in the study of markets, and you don't need to be necessarily going with the biggest fish. Any thoughts on that, or just kind of
Yeah,
parting
man.
wisdom?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite topics. Anytime you find an intersection, two things that you do well or are interested in, that you're probably not the best at either of them, but the intersection of the two, it's pretty easy to be world class at a unique intersection. So I'll give you a couple examples. There's some dude, I don't even know if it's still around, but this is from years ago. Is like a blacksmith that had a YouTube channel. Probably not the best blacksmith in the world, probably not the best YouTuber in the world, but the best YouTube blacksmither in the world, right? Or I know there's a guy that used to do. I came across this guy. I can't remember what city I was in. I was traveling. He did kayak yoga. He would do these sessions where he'd kayak out into like still waters, and then they would do like yoga or like paddle boards or something, like do yoga like on a paddle board, and had this whole thing. Probably not the best yoga instructor, probably not the best paddleboard guy, but certainly the best paddleboard yoga guy, right? Maybe the
Right.
only. And in the world where everything's global and you can get global distribution, you can find these unique overlaps that you can really win and dominate. And I think you can think of your partnerships in that way too. It's like if you bring together two things that are disparate and you have a unique intersection, neither one has to be the best in the world. It takes off some of that pressure, but those intersections, and then you start layering two or three intersections on top of each other, and you really niche down, you can absolutely get huge compounding wins. So like that's when you're in your zone of genius, when the things that you do have multiple layers of adding value. I mean, even the example I gave of a business having a podcast, it's like, okay, we have a podcast. We're educating our audience about the problems that our product solves. We're increasing and expanding we're educating our current customers because we get to say, hey, listen to the last episode of the podcast that helps answer this question that you're asking, right? So that they don't churn as much. We're getting new customers and attracting them. We're strategically using it to break into new accounts by bringing on influencers at that company as guests of the podcast, right? And you start to see the way that these things layer. So anytime you can like look for ways where one activity generates multiple wins in multiple directions. And I'll tell you, Charlie, I don't know if you intended this, but we got on this call. I was asking you the kind of stuff you're doing for your clients. You were telling me, and I immediately was like, ooh, we might need to hire you. We might need your services. Now, if you just would have emailed me and been like, hey, I'm offering some services, I don't know if I would have paid attention to it. But we happen to be doing a podcast. And because you brought me on your podcast, now I know about your business services, and whether I use them or I'll pass them on to other people, your network of people that are going to advocate for you just expanded just because you want to have a conversation about something totally unrelated to what you do for business, right? But like, that's where the value compounds. You have this platform and it allows you to do many, many things. So that was kind of a generic ramble, but that's why I would just tell people, like, don't feel the pressure to be the best. Find those intersections.
Yeah, well, I've always considered you an ideas guy. Like you're someone who lives in the world of ideas, but also with a highly practical bent. You had the Praxis project before, mentoring these young people into getting into the real world and figuring out what their passion is and how they can make a living out of it. And so in that sense, this conversation has served as a sort of mentoring talk for me. But it comes back to this idea of like Matt Ridley. I had mentioned him a little bit when we were emailing before. Had this TED talk back in 2010 about ideas having sex with each other. And this is the engine of human progress, that when you have meeting and mating of ideas to make new ideas, you get, progress and innovation. And it's an exciting time. I'm excited to see what happens with Partner Hacker, and we'll have to keep in touch more often, whether through podcasts or some other medium. It's always good seeing you tweet about the Warriors on what do you think are the odds here? And the clock is
Dude.
ticking because I'm still on free Zoom, so we've got 2 minutes.
Okay, I'll give you my 30-second take. Yeah, LinkedIn is what I use for business, and Twitter, I'm almost always complaining about basketball now. As weird as it sounds, I still feel kind of like we got a pretty solid chance we beat the Warriors. Not as good as I would have felt if we won the last game. Obviously, 3-1 is a bad place to be, but I'm like, I still kind of believe. Maybe I'm crazy.
I'm with you. I think that's the general sentiment here in the Bay Area. We're rational optimists, along with Matt Ridley, because we've seen them
Right.
do it before.
Love it. Hey, thanks so much, man. This was a blast.
Indeed. Thanks, Isaac. And I mean it. I'd love to stay in touch and keep the conversation going.
Let's do it.
All right.